perhaps I can say a few words of introduction to the speaker, Gonzalo Hernández, who is a member of Evaluation Advisory Panel. And, you know, with the members of Evaluation Advisory Panel, if you have been in the evaluation, community for a few years, none of them really needs to be introduced. You will know them because of what they wrote or what they did, and you've seen them in several conferences. But let me just say a few words of introduction anyway. And the topic of today is measuring multidimensional poverty. And Gonzalo currently is a director of Multidimensional Poverty Network of the University of Oxford, which is also his alma mater because he completed his doctoral program there. And many of you might remember him as executive secretary of the National Council for Evaluation of Social Development Policy in Mexico, also known as Coneval, for several years. He's also a senior research fellow at the FREE, the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation, FREE, and he was also previously a faculty member of the Instituto Tecnológico Autónomo of Mexico. So that, of course, doesn't fully represent what his contribution to evaluation, but gives a sense of importance of his roles that he's having now and he has taken in the past. So without much further ado, I would like to thank him for being available to us and giving me the floor on this very important topic, measuring multidimensional poverty. Now, sort of monetary methods to measure poverty have been under scrutiny, which is a euphemism for criticism for now many years. And I think we are all excited to know on how what progress has been done, and in the network that he leads, and perhaps also how this can be of use to us and how we can use it in the future in our own evaluation work. So again, thank you, and the floor is yours, Gonzalo.
Thank you very much, Fabrizio. Thank you very much for all of you for being here to talk about this topic, and thank you for the invitation. Well, so the most important reason why I included this topic for our talks, it's basically the link between multidimensional poverty and the evaluation process. So that's the reason why I chose this topic. Of course, I've been working on multidimensional poverty for many years. I've been working in evaluation for a lot of years. But what I want to stress here is why might be important as part of the evaluation and monitoring processes to include multidimensional poverty. Let me just share the presentation, and then I carry on explaining or telling you why I think this is important. Can you? Now you have it, right? So I will try to focus first on the importance of building an M&E system, and then I added a P here, which is a P of poverty. And that's the reason of the talk. So let me start saying that back in 2002 or around, I was part of a dialogue with Central for Global Development, and they were thinking, I mean, the main issue is how can we reduce the evaluation gap, right? So it's, hey, there are so many decisions being taken by governments without enough evidence, without good evidence, and therefore we have an evaluation gap. We have to reduce that evaluation gap. That was the main motivation of those talks at that time. At that time, I just started I was the director of evaluation in the Ministry of Social Development. And I mean, the main proposal at that time was to invest in impact evaluations produced by key international academics and try to evaluate programs. So let's get together, let's put money, let's finance impact evaluations, because evaluation is a public good. So we all benefit from the findings. And then there's a way of reducing the evaluation gap. And the reason, for instance, that 3IE existed is because of that dialogue at that time. Nevertheless, I mean, it was clear that this path was not enough, right? It's not enough only to have very important academics working on evaluations, because the countries were not fully included. And therefore, to accelerate the generation and use of evidence, I mean, it was clear that it was important that countries should enhance their evaluation systems and local capacity at all levels. So we can reduce the evaluation gap, let's say, not only when right academics produce evaluations, but when countries start demanding and thinking and producing evidence as well. So we have more fronts to have more evidence, and therefore to use more evidence. And therefore, this has been my main interest since 2002, sorry, not 2022, to think about how can we set up, how can we enhance M&E systems in countries. So how can we go from the evaluation of a single program? If you remember in the late 90s, I mean, you remember there was this famous evaluation done in Mexico, an evaluation of Progresa, CCT program. It was very well done. It was technically excellent, and it was very good. And it set a precedent in Mexico. Hey, it is important to have evaluations, and because that and other elements, Congress in Mexico started demanding more external evaluations to single programs. Therefore, these demands led to the institutionalization of the evaluation processes. So the task here is, how can we move from the evaluation of one program or single programs to have a full and working M&E system, right? And very importantly, how the evaluation findings of this system, how the evaluation findings of our M&E system can be used for policy. Because at the end of the day, that's what we want. We would like our findings, we would like the evaluations to be used in a systematic way. And this is a challenge. I mean, evaluating one program is a challenge. It's not always that easy, but going to build an M&E system is very important. So what happened? So let me tell you the example in Mexico. So because Congress started demanding evaluations, because the Ministry of Finance was ready to move on the evaluations, because Congress said it is important to have an independent evaluation unit to measure, to evaluate programs, and let's create Coneval. So Coneval was created for that purpose, to coordinate the evaluations in Mexico, especially in the social development area. So what happened in around 2005, 2006, 2007 is that with the creation of Coneval, together with the Ministry of Finance, and this is very important, we partner with the Ministry of Finance. We start to set up an M&E system which has this type of diagram that I'm placing here. In another time, I may have more time to talk about precisely how we build this M&E system, but just very briefly, I'll tell you, we thought that it was very important to improve planning and improve results indicators in programs and try to link them with the national development plans. So we had a huge campaign for logical frameworks for all programs to have results. We had an evaluation process with an annual evaluation plan in which we have various evaluations to many programs on every year. Then we have a recommendations follow-up. That's very important because we thought that just by the mere existence of evaluations, it is not clear that we're going to improve or going to change things. So we had specific elements for recommendations follow-up, and then an annual report. So we were doing that, and I think somehow we were successful because there was an important advancement on program evaluations. At the beginning, the quality was not very good, and we improved the quality of evaluations. By the way, we went beyond impact evaluations. It was clear that only impact evaluations were not enough to build an M&E system, because the demand from various stakeholders, specifically the Ministry of Finance, they were asking us to be more rapid in terms of results. Therefore, we open the spectrum of the evaluations that we produce. It was great that many countries start having results indicators. Somehow this changed the culture of evaluation. It was good. Nevertheless, there was little use of findings. I mean, it was not that clear that the stakeholders were actively using the evaluations. And I believe, and I don't know what you think, but this is one of the toughest elements when we have evaluation. How can we make sure? How can we convince? How can we include the evaluation findings in the evaluation, in the decision process of stakeholders? Because stakeholders, they have different sources of information to make decisions, not only the evaluation. And therefore, how can we do that? How can we do that? And here is, in Mexican example, how the multidimensional poverty was or has been very useful on that respect. So the difference between this scheme, this M&E scheme, and this one is that we included as an important key element of our M&E system, the objective of reducing multidimensional poverty measurement. And there were various reasons to include that. An important one is that Congress at the time thought that it was very important for Mexico to measure poverty, not only in an independent way through Coneval, but to do it in a multidimensional way, including various dimensions, because poverty was more than income, and we have to think about it more than income. Therefore, as I will show you in a second, in the Mexican case, the way we started measuring poverty included not only income, but access to social rights. And therefore, what happened, as placing this important result indicator for, at least for the public policy, it was very important because many stakeholders thought that trying to get to the reduction of poverty in a multidimensional way, it was very, very important. So somehow the inclusion of this important indicator changed some things about the use of evaluations, as I showed you in a second. Okay. So, so for the first time, we started measuring poverty in a multidimensional way. And for the first time, we had estimations for states, right? At the beginning of some years ago, we only have measurement for the whole country on an income basis. But now, at that time, we had measuring poverty in a multidimensional way for all the states, and by the way, for municipalities. And the interesting thing, from my point of view, is this one, that this is the general diagram I always use to show what happened in Mexico. Is the multidimensional poverty indicator, the MPI, includes income. Still, income is important. Then we have access to basic education, access to health services, access to social security, access to quality housing, access to basic housing services, and access to food. So the Congress was the one demanding that the poverty indicator should include, besides income, social rights. And one of the important reasons is that the Mexican Constitution includes social rights as one of the most important elements. So it was a reflection of saying, hey, if the Constitution and if our plans are going towards social rights, let's measure poverty, including social rights. So we have, therefore, the surveys to measure poverty done by the Statistical Office, which is an autonomous institution, the INEGI. We measure poverty every 2 years and every 5 years for municipalities. But a very interesting thing about this feature is that it is possible somehow to link the dimensions that we see here to concrete ministries or agencies in the government. Therefore, it is not true now that the only ministry responsible for poverty reduction is the Ministry of Social Development or the Ministry of Economy. It is also true that the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Housing, they do have a role to play in poverty reduction, and therefore they are responsible for poverty reduction. And not only that, when you measure poverty in a multidimensional way, the link between public policy and poverty reduction is higher, is stronger as when you measure poverty only by income. So for instance, if you have a public policy in which you have the objective of placing more children at school, of taking more children to school, if you do that and you are successful, that doesn't change almost anything in the short run, poverty by income. Nevertheless, if you include that element in your multidimensional poverty, you are reducing poverty every time a child goes to school as being part of access to education. And the same happens to access to health services. The same happens to housing. The same happens to basic services in the house. Every time a house has water, every time a house improves the quality of the house, every time that happens and is linked to a public policy or is linked to a public program, therefore you can say, I've been able from the Ministry of Housing, from the Ministry of Education, to reduce poverty according to my capacities and according to my objectives. Therefore, it was very interesting that governments, both the federal government and state governments, were really keen, unlike before, to say, hey, it will be a good idea to use this new tool as a guide for public policy in the social policy arena, right? So in 2013, the state governments became aware of the importance of poverty measurement, and they were aware about the press as well. And this is a very important element, that governors started saying, hey, the press is putting a lot of importance to poverty figures, knowing that poverty figures now are independent. That now, unlike in the past, poverty figures are done by an independent agency, and therefore we are showing what is happening. And then what happened is that poverty increased in some states, decreased in some states, increased in the country, reduced in the country, depending on the cycle, and therefore state governors became aware about the political implications of that. So I'll give you an example. One of the governors of the state of Puebla, he wanted to be president in the next round. So he said, I cannot allow poverty to increase in my state. And he started thinking about how to reduce poverty. The same happened to other governors. The same happened to the federal government. So the interesting thing, and that's what I want to stress this part, is that suddenly in our small office in Coneval, we started receiving governors knocking at the door saying, hey, Gonzalo, could you help us to understand how do you measure poverty, and which are the best programs to reduce poverty in all the dimensions? Therefore, we need to know through the evaluations, through the findings, through the studies of the program evaluations you have been doing, in which programs we should go for in the states to reduce poverty in every dimension. So the interesting thing is that instead of Coneval, a very small office about reducing evaluations, knocking at the door saying, hey, hello, I have a evaluation, please look at it, and it's going to be very interesting for your work. It happened the other way around. I started receiving people from governments saying, can you tell us which programs are the best? What should I improve to my programs in order for them to be effective? And therefore, almost magically, the use of evaluations on an almost systematic way, it was there because the incentive was let's reduce poverty in my state, and therefore the only way of doing that is through a better public policy. What happened, I mean, this is not the only reason why this happened, but between 2014 and 18, when this awareness was there, poverty was reduced substantially in these 2 years. This is extreme poverty. And what happened basically is that governments started investing more in these programs and targeting better to poor populations. And therefore, in some of the dimensions, they improved basically health services, the access to health services, improved housing, the quality of housing, and basic services in the house. Or at least those three elements improved. Income improved a bit, but also the other elements were important. And therefore, what I want to underline as well is that the decision makers, policy makers were happy. Were happy that their public policy efforts were reflected directly in the poverty reduction, right? And you don't have that automatically with income. What happened in terms of the budget, and let me just show you this last chart, is that Carnival, through the evaluation findings, produce a document every year to help the budgetary process, saying, hey, if the government really wants to reduce poverty, from our point of view, these should be the priority programs in which you should invest the budget in order to reduce poverty. So we were linking the findings of the evaluation to specific budget decisions. And what happened in some years is that the percentage of priority programs was higher than not priority programs. There are still many other programs for other purposes. But what I'm trying to say here is it was possible that policymakers, especially those related to the budget process, were using the evaluations, were using the findings in trying to improve the budget process, because at the end of the day, the reduction of multidimensional poverty was a very important objective. So that's what I wanted to come here and talk about this element. So I just finished by saying, when we are building a monitoring and an evaluation system, which is a very important task, which should be a task where countries should be involved in trying to improve what they do. You have a mixture of technical challenges plus political challenge. How can you solve both in order to have a solid M&E system that not only is producing good evaluations in the best way we can do, technically speaking, but how can we listen to others? How can we include what others think? How can we include the incentives that there are around for the M&E system to be solid and to work, and actually for the findings to be used in public policy? And in the Mexican case, during these periods, the multidimensional poverty indicator was a very important element to do that. So I'll stop here, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo. I think very rich presentation, and very important the element of multidimensional poverty. Also important the reference to a national system, and to closing the loop of evaluation to knowledge, and also looking at the three elements of evaluation, which is accountability, learning, and also supporting the prioritization. So focusing and focusing on policy priorities. Perhaps I wanted at this stage to check with Indran, who has joined us, if he wanted to add his own thoughts at this stage, or he wanted to lead the discussion now.
Mauricio, can you help me in stop sharing my? I don't know what happened. I cannot.
Not sure I can do because I don't have sharing rights, but perhaps.
Yeah, I don't know why. I don't know what's anyway.
Perhaps Nene can do it. Nene, are you able to stop sharing?
I can try, but I accessed not from the link. I will try from online. Let's see.
I will keep trying anyway, Fabrizio here. So
okay.
There should be an icon that says stop sharing it, and it is as a red color.
Yeah, because I minimize the window, then I cannot make it bigger. Therefore, I cannot see that button. Oh, no, he's here. Here. Yes, I'm here. It's here. He's there.
Great. Sure. We're all back. Okay. No, I don't see Indran. Maybe he yeah. Oh, sorry, Indran. Sorry. There you are. Apologies.
Thanks very much. Always listening with interest. Gonzalo and I go back a long way. In fact, the case study of Conoval and Mexico was replicated in the early years in South Africa with the Public Service Commission when the transversal M&E system was rolled out. So many of the similarities are there, but I won't say anything more. Let's get the discussion from the group. It's important, the word multidimensional changed the optic in terms of the measurement globally. And even when we were discussing this at the NEC conference in terms of leaving no one behind, it did bring in the fact that one had to look at both income and non-income sources in the overall measurement. So it was quite revolutionary internationally and has been documented. But it also means from an evaluative point of view, there has to be greater sophistication in triangulating the different streams of influence before one comes at some matrix in terms of what constitutes poverty. But I'll hand back to Fabrizio, and I'm sure Gonzalo, many of them have questions for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And so colleagues and members of the advisory panel, you can just raise your virtual hand, raise your real hand, or just start talking if I happen not to see you. I saw one raised hand. I think was it Joanna? Did you have a raised hand, Joanna? No, so it's my mistake. Okay, let's see if someone else. Perhaps there are raised hands and I don't see them.
I can start if you like, Fabrizio. No,
okay, just, please, Joanna, and then Jeanette, and then Donna. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot. Good presentation, and of course, famous example by now. Just two remarks more. When this multidimensional poverty, this is something that we heard quite often since then, right, in other places as well, and has been replicated elsewhere. I think we had it in Uganda as well. I think it's important to say that what is the multidimensional is the measurement, because poverty by definition is multidimensional. I mean, saying multidimensional poverty doesn't make sense, right? Because poverty is multidimensional. So I think it's important that we include the measurement, right, when we refer to it. So the measurement is the thing that is different about this multidimensional tool, which is very important. The other issue I would be really interested is okay, realizing the multi-dimensions, but then how would you actually make sure that the assistance and the support that comes and the financing supports is really coordinated and complementary? Because there is always this issue, and you're mentioning the different sector departments which were doing things, and then you span across them measuring what has come out of it. But then how would you actually get them to coordinate their initiative? So to make it really work at the, when it comes down to the people. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have Donna Mertens and then Rob van den Berg.
Okay, thank you for a great presentation, Gonzalo. I do think this is one of the most critical aspects of what we do in international development when we talk about the reduction of poverty, and thinking of it only in terms of income clearly is insufficient. And so trying to suss out what are the various dimensions and how do we get a handle on those is so important. And so I would maybe just almost a follow-up to what Jeanette just said is if you could discuss some of the challenges that you encountered in trying to implement this system and how you overcame those challenges. And then one of the challenges that I'm aware of that was in the literature when this idea of multidimensional poverty was first being written about was that someone may have access to food and housing and healthcare, but they may still be in a very oppressive situation as a sex worker or as a farm laborer, as a refugee. And so I'm wondering what the discussion might be around that kind of the dimension of poverty that goes beyond just access to food and housing and so forth. So if you could make some comments on that, or others who've had experience with that, I would really like to hear more about it.
Thank you very much. And then Rob van den Berg.
Yeah, thank you, Gonzalo. It was a very interesting presentation. Really great to see how this all fits together. And I would say that in general, as Indran already pointed out, many other countries were looking at Mexico as the example of how this should be done. And we're trying to learn from you and from Coneval and from how Mexico was approaching this integrated and comprehensive approach of poverty. But then it all ended when López Obrador became president of Mexico. And actually, that was a surprise because he's, after all, somebody who is concerned about poverty. He's somebody who should take this up and who should be a champion of this. And he wasn't. And I know that people then say that, well, López Obrador was a populist, is a populist more than a scientist or somebody with attention for indicators and so on. But what is your perception of this? You've seen the to what extent is this now surviving in Mexico, and to what extent are the states capable of and the municipalities capable of continuing on with this work and keeping it alive? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we can, for a moment, pause with question and give the floor to Gonzalo to give his take to these questions and comments.
Thank you, Fabrizio. Very, very good questions and points of view. Thank you very much. I started by saying, yes, it was great, Indran, to receive 8 years ago people from South Africa, from the presidency, exchanging ideas about M&E systems. So it was great. I remember vividly receiving that contingent led by Ian Goldman, if I remember correctly. It was great. And then we had exchanges with South Africa all the way down. And yes, I think, I mean, Joanna is right. I mean, it's not that the novelty is about poverty being multidimensional. It's about poverty being measured in a multidimensional way. Of course, that's the novelty, and that's the challenge. You know, because the way when you measure poverty with income, it's a very practical way to do it. I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong, but what I'm saying is this is very practical. It is very easy to understand who's poor, the one who's below this cutoff. That's quite easy to understand, but it has challenges. And when you think about measuring in a multidimensional way, if you use it in one dimension, is a challenge. When you put it more dimension, is a bigger challenge. And that's why you have so many ways of doing things, right? In the Mexican case, we included in the same indicator income plus the other dimensions. In other cases, so for instance, OPHI, which I'm related to, the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, they don't include income, and therefore the multidimensional poverty, the MPI, is a complement to income poverty. And OPHI has been very successful in promoting MPIs, multidimensional poverty indicators, in many countries. And in fact, they are working actually with many countries in doing that. So the interesting thing is, if you remember, the target 1.2 of the SDGs is about the reduction of poverty in all dimensions according to national definition. And therefore, it implies, if we read it well, it implies that all countries should be able to have their own way of measuring poverty in a multidimensional way. And that is what OPHI is doing with many other countries, that they say, hey, poverty is an important concept, but perhaps in your country, according to your needs, according to the history, according to the data you have, you may measure that differently from Mexico and from Colombia and from South Africa, and I think that's very interesting. I mean, I would do when the agenda is finished in 2031. What I would like to do, Johanna, is try to see what happened to countries with that target 1.2. How many countries were able to produce their own poverty, multidimensional poverty indicator, with or without the help from international institutions, and why Colombia, why Bhutan, why Honduras, why they selected these dimensions and these priorities and these cutoffs. That'll be a very interesting analysis showing not only the data limitations and stress, but the priorities that countries give to poverty, and very importantly, the political agreements about measuring poverty that way, right? Because what is important from my point of view in terms of using or not an MPI or any other indicator is if there is agreement, a social agreement to use it or not. Because I could be a researcher in my university, I can fix a very nice poverty indicator, but I'm the only one convinced by it. No one uses it because I mean, even if I'm a Nobel Prize person, I need to have a social agreement, and that's what happened in the Mexican case or the Colombian case or all the cases where they have been launching officially a multidimensional poverty indicator after a long political discussion between the stakeholders, which is I think is very interesting. So, and of course, once you have that, Johanna, you can see how sometimes countries have been able to coordinate their ministries in order for them to use it either for budget purposes or for other purposes. So at the same time, in OPHI, we are looking at how countries are doing that. So for instance, in Colombia, they do have what they call the inclusion roundtable, La Mesa de Inclusión. So they get together with the president from every 2 months with the social ministries, and they talk about what is needed in each of the ministries in order to address multidimensional poverty the way it is measured in Colombia. This all started with President Santos, but the good thing is that even a new president Ivan Duque, has been using that, even if he was from a different political party, they've been using that. And so we have examples in the Mexican case that happens. I give you an example, a dramatic example of the state of Puebla, that this governor wanted to be president eventually. So he wanted to reduce poverty. And the instruction to his budget minister was, do not accept any project from the ministries, the local ministries, if they don't show you how that project, that program is going to reduce multidimensional poverty in Puebla. So that was the instruction for the minister. And once he told me, you know, Gonzalo, you made my life easier, because I've got ministers all the time in my door saying, hey, I want money for this, I want money for that, I want money for that. And I have to say yes. How can I say no? How can I say yes? With this instruction from the governor, say, yes, I can give you the money if you show me that your program is going to reduce multidimensional poverty. And that what happened is that between 2014 and 18, Puebla was the leader in poverty reduction in Mexico during this time. So that was interesting. Yes, Janet, we have, yes, very interesting that so MPI can be used for targeting. It's being used for targeting as well. And it's interesting to know that also because of COVID, in many countries, Honduras and others, together with other institutions, sometimes with the World Food Program, they changed a bit from the multidimensional poverty measurement to the vulnerability poverty measure for the multidimensional vulnerability when COVID happens. So you say, hey, these households have multiple deprivations and they are more at risk on COVID. So that type of exercise was done in Honduras, and I know if you know that, and I think that was a very interesting way of doing that. And it is very interesting to know that IFAD had done that. It will be great to learn about that process. So Donna, as I was saying, one of the most important challenges in addressing the measurement in a multidimensional way is how do you make the agreements, right? Because if we got together in a room, the ones we are here, we all, in a different way, could came with a different way of measuring poverty in a multidimensional way. So you could use those dimensions. I could include other dimensions. I could make the cutoff here or you there. So the reason we have so many poverty indicators is because there are different ways of doing that. So I believe that the most important challenge coming back to a country is how do you address the political agreement process, right? When that happens, and it's been happening in many countries, fortunately, when the agreement is there, then you can say, hey, this is not the most the best poverty measurement in the world. This is not the best one. This is the one we got out of the agreement with the limitations, because sometimes the limitations of data are there. So even if you want to include this dimension, you don't have it, right? So with a limitation, but with agreements, this is the indicator we got. It is not perfect. It will never be perfect, especially when you're measuring poverty. But we all are an agreement of doing this. And going back to Rob's observation, which is very, very, very important, what happened, so what Rob is saying is, the evaluation process, evaluating programs, measuring poverty in a multidimensional way, is because 20, 15 years ago, Mexico was on the mood of doing that. The political process was there. The Congress was from a different color politically from the president, and the Congress was pushing the president to evaluate, to measure. And that is why we started doing that in the past. And I think that's one of the reasons that we improved a lot, both the evaluation process and the metrics in poverty. because there was the political will to do it. When we have a new president who doesn't believe in data, who doesn't believe in statistics, who every morning he goes to the press, he says, I've got other data. When you have someone like this, it is very challenging, Rob, to do that. And it is a fact that the budget for evaluation in Mexico has been reduced over the past 3 years. And it is a fact that this new government is not paying attention to the multidimensional poverty indicator as it happened before. The only good thing about this, Rob, is that because the multidimensional poverty and the creation of Coneval to evaluate programs on the social policy, it was in the law. It is in the Constitution at the end of the day. Coneval is still there. Coneval is producing evaluations. Coneval is measuring poverty. Coneval said that between 2018 and 20, poverty increased in 4 million people. They were able to say that. Of course, when the president, when they made that public, the president said, "Hey, I don't believe you. I have other data," right? He says that. But the good thing is that Coneval is there, the statistical office is there, and the challenge, Rob, is how can we carry on evaluating programs, even if the president or the government is not keen on that, are not keen on that. So I think that's the challenge, because you see change of government all the time. I mean, in the States, Mr. Trump was not a believer in evaluation, right? Or in science. How can you still do and produce evaluations and make them important and useful in the middle of that? That's the challenge.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo. We maybe have a few minutes for last question or comment, if there's any last question or comment from the audience. Oh, yes, Hans, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Gonzalo, for an interesting presentation, a very useful presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes, sure.
Very good. No, I found this fascinating. I think you partly responded to my question in the sense that you said that the last figures that you had was for 2018 in your table, and then poverty had always gone down, and everybody seemed to be very happy. And now apparently there's been an upswing, and the political appetite for that upswing is very modest, I understand that you're saying. So, you know, there is this political challenge with any kind of these measures, and not sure what to do about it. I think something that we need to reflect further on. The other question I had was more of a technical nature. As you are more of a specialist than I am in this, maybe you could say some words of the advantages with this multidimensional or actually there are many kind of indices like this that takes into account different dimensions. And one problem, of course, is that you don't know exactly what you're measuring in the end, because it's an average or a weighted average of the various things. And in the end, when you're going to do action on this, you will still need to go down to the data for schooling, for housing, for various things to be able to find measures to implement around it. So, you know, it gives an overall impression of where country or state or municipality is going, but it's not enough for drilling down and finding the actions to throw it, to solve it. Do you agree with that, or what you see about strengths and links, weaknesses with those weighted multidimensional indices? Thank you.
Yeah. I wasn't. Your voice was not that clear at the end, but I think I got the whole thing. So yes, I mean, the challenge, as we said with Rob, I think the challenge of evaluators and evaluation units or M&E systems is how can we carry on working, and which should be the incentives to carry on, and how can we change incentives to carry on with evaluations. By the way, from my point of view, because what we want to have is a strong M&E system which works in a systematic way, not only 1 year or 2 years. What we need to do is we should keep changing the incentives for it to work, and it depends if you put more emphasis on the positive or the negative according to the government. So, for instance, one of the most important lessons I got from being Coneval is that we suddenly thought that it was a good idea to have an evaluation award. Every year we presented awards for programs or ministries where they were doing a good job in terms of the evaluation. We were not giving awards of good programs. We were giving awards for good evaluations, or a ministry that was able to address the challenge, address the evaluation findings to improve the programs, or a program that produced a great log framework. So we try to give awards publicly, and it is amazing, Hans, that you saw governors, you saw ministers trying to get the awards, and when they got it, they were able to go to the ceremony, to be present, because the press was there, right? So we understand that evaluating is not easy. We understand that sometimes evaluations hit programs, say, hey, this is not a good program. But if you compensate that with positive incentives, then you are able to maintain the interest of the evaluation. And so it was an amazing. So that's the challenge. The technical one is, if I understood correctly, it is true. I mean, there are many ways of putting together the dimensions to get the indicator, right? And the World Bank and the academic who was there for ages introducing income poverty and now is retired, I don't remember. He said, you know, I don't like these multidimensional indicators because they are like marsh indexes, right? So you put onions and meat and ginger. So you put everything that is in around, and then you mix it up, and you said you have a very good multidimensional indicator. And you have something very confusing, and he might be right. So what I think is, as long as you have a theory of change behind all the dimensions that you put together, and in such a way that you have something to say about the theory of change behind it, because instead of having a carrot and an onion and the sugar, instead of having everything that you that sometimes you put, if you have a theory of change behind that, it is most likely that indicator makes sense, and that indicator helps you to coordinate better with the stakeholders when you want to address a multidimensional poverty reduction strategy in the country. So, but it's still a challenge. I mean, there are good and bad multidimensional indicators, but the most important one is, and I strongly believe this, that if in Uganda, if in Bhutan, if in Colombia, they got to an agreement about that way of measuring that, even if it's not technically perfect, if that is a way of convincing the society and stakeholders to address poverty, then we should go for that. Yeah.
Many thanks, Gonzalo. So if we have no other question, perhaps we give the floor to Indran for his final remarks.
Yes, no, thank you very much. As always, very rich, stimulating, provocative. And take your last comment, even if it is not empirically perfect, if it brings the decision makers to the table and puts the focus on poverty, that in itself is an achievement. I think sometimes we may get too stuck and caught in the methodology to a point of inertia and marching on the spot. But the questions have been good. We will record and this and share it more broadly. It's an important conversation that needs to be shared. Thank you for your time and effort, and looking forward to seeing all of you on platform again. And once again, colleagues, join me in thanking Gonzalo for this presentation. He brings with him a tremendous amount of experience and gravitas. Thank you, Gonzalo.
Thank you, Adrian. Great to see you. Great to see you all here. And it's always have to be in the middle of his friends. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Gracias, Fabrizio.
De nada.
Cheers.